Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to today's CFD Professional Development Conversation Series on transforming the fashion industry through equal access to capital. I'm Sasha Brown, the Director of Professional Development, and today's final conversation will focus on changing the wholesale landscape to support minority-owned businesses. This three-part webinar series on discussing the intricacies of raising capital for minority-owned businesses was developed in collaboration with Impact, a CFDA program to discover and incubate Black and Brown talent in the industry. Once again, leading this conversation is Felita Harris, who has served in senior positions, including those of Chief Strategy and Revenue Officer at Harlem's Fashion Row, Icon 360, Executive Vice President of Alexander Wang, and Senior Vice President of Donna Karan Collection. In 2020, Felita earned a certificate from Cornell University in diversity and inclusion. Her philanthropic efforts are focused on supporting organizations that empower women and provide economic relief to marginalized communities. Felita is a founding member of Raisefashion, a nonprofit network of fashion industry leaders that provides pro bono consultation to Black-owned businesses and individuals. Additionally, she is a thought leader for Open to All, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the principle that everyone should be welcome regardless of race, ethnicity, national origin, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, immigration status, religion, or disability. We are saving 15 minutes at the end of this conversation for audience Q&A, so please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A tab throughout the hour, and we'll get to as many as we can. So Felita, thank you once again for leading this conversation for us, and I'll hand the mic over to you.
Thank you, Sasha, and thank you all for joining our last webinar on this topic. Today, we have 5 incredible panelists joining us from key sectors of the fashion industry. We'll start with introductions, and at the end, we'll open for questions. So welcome, panelists, and thank you for joining us. Let's begin with introductions. Charles, will you start us off?
Gladly. Thank you, Felita. Thank you to all the women that I'm on this panel with. Really excited to be here, but my name is Charles Harbison, founder and CEO of Harbison Studio, now LA-based luxury fashion brand centered in women's wear and creating clothes that allow women to aesthetically represent themselves to the world with more power and confidence, and extending that out to people of every gender and identity. We're centered on equity and sustainability and beauty, so that's what I do. And I'll pass it over to Edwina.
I'm Busayo. I'm the creator and founder of Busayo, and we're based in Brooklyn. We create all of our fabrics and textiles in Nigeria, and it's been a 10-year journey, and we're finally getting there slowly. So I'm excited to be here and to meet all of you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Edwina Kulego. Super excited to be here with this fabulous group and with Felita. Thanks for having me. I am the Vice President of International and Men's for Informa Markets Fashion. We're the leading fashion trade show producer for shows like Coterie, Magic, Project, for example. So we're all about connecting retailers with brands, connecting the industry as a whole, and incubating emerging brands. So I'm super excited to have this conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amira Rasool. I'm the founder and CEO of the Folklore Group. We're a commerce company that focuses on empowering diverse consumer product businesses in global markets. We do that through our B2B wholesale e-commerce platform, the Folklore Connect, which allows retailers to be able to discover brands in places like Africa, South America, Asia, and then also diverse brands that you'll find in the US and Europe as well. So excited to have this conversation.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ibada. I am the founder of LULAH. We design better handbags that are made in Brooklyn to empower formerly incarcerated women. We're the first brand in New York to partner with the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice to provide a pipeline to sustainable careers in the fashion industry for women who have been impacted by incarceration. Super happy to be here. I'm also, thank you, Felita. I'm also an assistant professor at Parsons School of Design in the School of Design Strategies and part-time faculty in the School of Fashion.
Amazing. Thank you, panelists, for joining. My first question is for our designers. Wholesale is back. Some reports indicate many brands are now bolstering their wholesale distribution again. And as a result, it's more collaborative and both parties share some marketing efforts and consumer insights. So how has retail changed or progressed for BIPOC brands? And is it making an impact? We'll start with Busayo.
Thank you, Felita. I mean, the last 2 years has been obviously phenomenal in, I think, many of our businesses. I don't think that, the death of the murder of George Floyd has certainly made a difference, I think, in terms of the marketplace receptivity to what was already there. So certainly when I think about our business, Saks was the first brand to pick us up, and that literally opened the door to other relationships. So Neiman Marcus came on board, Nordstrom will be coming on in the spring. So certainly my ability to scale Busayo, to be able to quit my day job, which I finally did April 1st. All of that really, thank you. All of that really came from the wholesale relationship. And I think for me, like, it just wouldn't have been able to, our DCC business was good, but it wasn't enough, certainly, for me to be able to say, okay, I'm going to quit the day job and the business would be scaled at the points that it's scaled to. And then I think also being able to have access to doors across the country. I mean, we make our clothes in Nigeria. I'm based in Brooklyn. So we just get access to markets that across the country that I wouldn't have otherwise. So I certainly think that this conversation is like really critical for scaling. It's not the only model, obviously, but certainly for me and the business that I want to build, it's been really, really critical for our success. But really looking at, I think, the mix of like smaller retailers, I think, is also important, not to overlook those. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunity there as well.
I definitely would echo that. For me, wholesale it's like a great equalizer of sorts. The capacity it has to really put a brand on par with everyone else is important, and it's something that we should continue to mine and to critique and to interrogate, because at the end of the day, the customer is just responding to an item that resonates with her or him or them. And so with our wholesale partnerships with like Saks Fifth Avenue, we just had a great Moda Operandi trunk show. We'll be at Matches in this coming spring. I can clearly see that the landscape for wholesale is very different today than 5-6 years ago at my first stab at Harbison, and I'm incredibly grateful for that.
And we want to get into that, Charles. I'm glad you teed that up. Ibada, do you have any other insights?
Sure. I mean, I would just add that I think that it really helped to validate the market opportunity that we've always known as BIPOC designers exists. So I think it's affirming in that sense, to be able to completely identify and capture market share, that being led by designers who haven't historically had that opportunity or who have been excluded by design, really, I think, has helped to point to not only a deeper issue, as Busayo kind of, spoke about earlier, but also innovative ways to sort of address that, and for that also to be led by Black designers and designers of color. So what that looks like also being part of the creative process.
Great. And Edwina, there are both benefits and challenges associated with expanding into wholesale. So what do brands need to do to be ready?
Great question. I get this one all the time. The first thing is you have to know who you are as a brand. I think the POV, your DNA, your ethos, obviously the US is the largest fashion market in the world, right? And so there are a lot of competitors out there. There are a lot of established brands that have been doing this for a long time. So if you are preparing to step into wholesale. Charles and I have had this conversation. It's all about being able to communicate who you are as a brand. What makes you different? Is it your aesthetics? Is it the makeup of your product? Is it your production? Is it your branding? Some brands do a fantastic job on social media, promoting their brand through marketing. And so knowing how you can stand out and being able to educate a buyer on how you fit into their store. It's about understanding retail, how consumers are shopping now, what's trending. And so I encourage a lot of brands that want to step into wholesale and ones that say, I have to be in Saks. Can you please connect me with the buyer at Matches, for example? It's important to understand how the retailers are curating their stores, what brands you align with. So doing a competitive analysis is key, making sure your price points are ready for market, and obviously your production. So another part of it is we have brands that have phenomenal designs, beautiful samples. They come to the shows, they connect with retailers that are ready to write orders, but then they have a hard time fulfilling it. So supply chain is a big conversation, making sure that you do have the production that you can deliver on time, many different factors, but ultimately it's about knowing who you are as a brand and understanding your customer and where they shop. Once you've tackled that, you'll be able to target the right stores and get their buy-in.
So I do have a follow-up question. You mentioned supply chain and logistics. It's critical. Do you have any resources available for designers that are struggling in that area?
Absolutely. We actually have a whole event called Sourcing at Magic that's designed to support brands with supply chain solutions, manufacturers from all over the world. It's always been based in Vegas. It's now an online platform. So it's Sourcing at Magic online. It may be .com. Don't quote me. I'll share it with all the participants here today. We have a lot of tools online and it's coming to New York. So for anyone that's East Coast based, we will have sourcing in New York in September.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Amira and Edwina, through your organizations, brands are able to connect with retailers and vice versa. So what innovative solutions have your organizations come up with for BIPOC brands?
Such a timely question, because Amira and I actually partnered at Coterie, which is our women's event, and we were able to bring in the Folklore group into the event as a part of our IMFC program, which is Informa Markets Fashions for Change, where we support brands of color, bring them into the show, give them an opportunity to showcase their collections and meet with buyers. So Amira, I feel like you should speak to this because you've been a part of it. You were at the event. Tell us about your experience and anything else you would like to share.
Yeah, sure. So yes, like Edwina mentioned, we partnered with Coterie in September. It was actually my first trade show. I'd never been to a trade show before. And we partnered to bring 4 of our brands, one based out of Toronto, one based out of South Africa, and 2 based out of Nigeria, to be able to present their collections and also just get the word out about the Folklore Connect and how we're helping these brands from a digital standpoint. So with the Folklore Connect, as I mentioned, it's B2B wholesale e-commerce, and we've specifically targeted markets that don't have this technology that's readily available for them, or if they do have it available, it doesn't actually meet the specific needs that some of these designers have based off of just like infrastructure issues, based off of payment, based off of different logistic carriers that might work in the US but don't really typically work in these regions. And so with our technology, we decided to build our platform with diverse people in mind. So that's geographically diverse as well as racially diverse. So what we focused on was making sure that the technology also addressed like certain educational issues that a lot of brands have, where those who are not used to working in wholesale were able to provide more detailed prompts and like demos, and we're able to simplify the language of how even how we describe certain parts of the products or how we describe certain fields. So it's really easy for anyone to be able to come pick up and say, I want to start, wholesale. the first step I can take, after I've done the amazing things that Edwina mentioned, is to be able to make it digital, and to be able to find retailers that otherwise would not find me, because they're not going to like Brazil for, Brazil Fashion Week, or they're not going to, Cape Town Fashion Week. And so it's been really great to see people adapt to the tools. Brands have really, adapt to them really quickly, have really given a lot of strong feedback around, things like us being able to show them what their markup is, and show the retailers what their markup is, without having to do the calculations. Just simple things like that, automatically being able to create line sheets. So once you upload all the products to your digital showroom, you can export them all and get a beautiful custom line sheet. So things like that is really what we wanted to focus on, and being able to address specific needs like payment. We can now send payment to different countries in Africa, whereas other B2B platforms out there right now don't allow African brands either on or to be able to receive payment. So that's really what our focus is. We don't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel, but we want to be able to make sure that we are prioritizing the people that these other B2B platforms have not really seen the value in, and therefore have not properly addressed with their technology.
I do think in some ways you have reinvented the wheel. I love what you're doing. And one thing that sticks out to me is that you're removing so many barriers that Black designers are facing with the payment. Can you go a little deeper and talk to the audience about your platform, as if they're hearing it for the first time, because I think it's exceptional.
Sure, yes. So from a brand perspective, you'd apply to join the platform, or we'd reach out to you. We'd have a call to learn more about your business, to make sure that it makes sense for you to be on the platform, that we would be able to provide benefit, that you would actually need to use the platform. And then you would create your digital showroom. So that means like putting in the information like your minimums, your order minimums, your reorder minimums, you set your own payment terms. And then our system makes sure that the retailer adheres to those payment terms automatically. You'd be able to set your order minimums on a product level, set your order maximums on a product level, put all of this weight information in there so that you can automatically generate discounted shipping labels without actually having to do the manual work yourself. And so that's the experience from the brand side, being able to receive orders through their digital showroom, being able to receive payment, within 24 to 72 hours of the orders being placed, being able to receive deposits. And then we automatically charge the retailer for the balance based off of your payment terms. So you don't actually have to go chase that retailer, which is a big thing that a lot of brands have to do. So saving time that way. We even built in video chat functionality where people can actually video chat through the platform, as well as message back and forth through the platform. And what's great is that that you're in a class of vetted brands. So we vet all of the brands to make sure that they meet certain criteria. And that also really makes it exciting for the retailers who have this now curated marketplace. People have set their D&I goals. People have set not even just diversity and inclusion, but sustainability goals, which most of our brands on the platform are sustainable. So they now have a marketplace of vetted brands that they can go and they can sort by, price point, by category, by things like if it's LGBTQI owned or if it's woman owned. So really, really making it easy to use or as a conscious commerce platform. We're really making it easy for them to be able to do good with their purchases, and then also find really amazing brands that will set them apart from the retailer that's down the street, and really give them a nice assortment and make them a lot of money. So it's not, charity. We're curating the best of the best. We used to be a direct-to-consumer platform. We sold a lot of the brands that we work with now, and we made, a nice amount of money doing it. So we're now empowering other retailers to be able to discover those brands that in 2018 we discovered, and now, large retailers right now are benefiting from those same brands succeeding.
Bravo, I love it. Charles and Busayo, you've been expanding into wholesale for quite some time. And Charles, you've done this before. So what's the difference now? What's new? Can you tell us what the challenges are, and what have you seen change?
What's new?
What's new?
What's new? I'd say from like a business and a wholesale point of view, the newness is buyers particularly not buying only based on their own personal proclivities, but really looking at the customer that they want to bring in. And I think it's the understanding that you want everybody's money. So optimizing your assortment to cater to, a larger number of customers. And that's one of the benefits with myself and Harbison. So much of what I talk about with this brand and the clothing that I present is allowing a retailer and a wholesaler to bring in a new customer. My fit is optimized for a different woman. My palette's optimized for a different woman. The fabrics are optimized for a different woman, and the story is as well. And so by way of that, they're opting into, more money, and that's a great thing. And I think there's more clarity around that these days, and that's changed the landscape a lot. What else has changed? I think also there's less, from a designer point of view, there's less fear and reluctance at being completely 10 toes down honest about my point of view and my story. And previously with the industry, I think there was a pull. Even those of us who lightly would push the envelope, we found that we just weren't building the businesses. The orders weren't coming in. The response wasn't there. The response was happening digitally. The response was happening. Customers wanted it, but they were not getting access to it. And that fear really can just destabilize you personally, and clearly can destabilize your business, or it's a non-starter. And now there's less fear around telling the stories that you want to tell and prioritizing exactly the kind of product that you want to make. So I think that's changed.
That's great.
How's that
Busayo.
work?
Yeah.
I think there's more receptivity, I think, to the work. I think retailers, we've always been here. We've always created good work. I think doors that I knocked on previously that felt like they were slammed shut, like completely, they cracked open a little bit. And I think being ready and being able to walk through that little crack and opening, I do notice, like, I think relationships with retailers is something that's interesting. Like, I think about it as like relationships, either when you're dating a great boyfriend or you're dating a mediocre boyfriend, right? And like, what do you do to nurture relationships? And it is just like that, like the same, kind of paying attention to it and watering it and making sure if something goes wrong, you talk about it. So that's really, I think, the area that I'm really focused on right now. And then also, I think there's some retailers that you feel like they're committed to developing a long-term relationship, where others might feel like it's a little bit of a dalliance, and so wanting to really make sure that these relationships are like long marriages as opposed to just like, a short, I don't know, hookup or something. So that's really where the challenges are. I'm sorry it's a bit loud here. I'm at an art fair. But yeah, so really working on nurturing the relationship with retailers and making sure that they're long and you're telling stories together, as opposed to, and they feel like invested in the growth of your business. I think that's the area that I'm really working on and figuring out.
How's the feedback loop from retailer to brands? Has that improved?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that, I have one retailer right now where we have monthly meetings, like monthly business meetings, right? And that's something that I asked for, and they were really great about doing. And then there are other partners that I have that we don't have that type of model. So it really depends, I think, on how much watering you are also doing, right? I really think about it as a partnership. I don't always like that word, but I really do think about it as a partnership. And it's like, what am I doing on my end to make sure that the brand, the work is moving for them as well? So is it doing co-ops, for example, which, I didn't have the funds to do for a very long time, but now marketing co-ops is essentially you work with the retailer to do some marketing, but the brand pays for it, right? So there's all these other things that you have to do once you get into the department store to make sure that you stay in the department store, So really being open to some of those, and also working collaborative with them in terms of with things are moving or things that are not moving, that types of things. And then I think being much more assertive in the buying process, that's kind of like the biggest thing to me now, is like, if you're buying something that I don't think is a good idea, like being able to say that and feeling very confident that like, no, that's not for you. You know, so I think those are some things that designers should think about when you begin to get into these types of relationships.
Yeah, great.
And I'm definitely connected to the buyers that I work with. Sometimes we develop friendships, and I think that's important too. I sell my clothes. I am in the showroom. I cut my teeth at a design house where the designer was super involved, and I like that. And so we're regularly connected to all the buyers that we work with, as well as our clients as well.
Right, I love that. Ibada and Edwina, as great as wholesale can be, we cannot ignore the fact that several minority-owned businesses have closed to wholesale. So why do you think this is occurring?
You want me to go, Ibada? Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Kick it off, Edwina. Sure.
I would say the pandemic has definitely been a huge factor in, you know, a lot of people putting wholesale on pause. We as a trade show, for example, we had to stop our events during the trade shows. And I think brands were able to get creative from a digital standpoint, from a virtual standpoint, sending line sheets. I know some brands in New York that were Ubering over samples to buyers to make sure that they could, you know, view the product, touch and feel it. And so I think people have become more creative with how they want to approach their sales. I think the omni-channel approach is one that works really well. So instead of having, you know, 90% of your business wholesale or even 100, I think brands are now saying, well, let me go 50% wholesale. Let me be a little bit more selective about the stores that I want to collaborate with. I'm sensing that a lot from brands, that they're more selective. They have key targets of stores that they want to get into, and then they're focusing on their online store. They're focusing on selling on social media and putting budgets into ads. And so I think that the brands have become crafty and creative with diversifying how they do business. But I see a growth in wholesale. We're seeing that at our events too. There are more retailers that are invested, more that want to come out, some that haven't discovered new brands in person for a long time. So there is an appetite, but I think it is all about brands wanting to diversify their offering and to touch customers in different ways.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say like there are definitely like systemic factors, cultural factors, like you know, like the just what's playing out with the pandemic still, right? And the impact that that's having on the economy. And so if you think about like the top down or like the ripple effect of that, if like wholesale, like if retailers are being squeezed in some capacity, right? If they're working with less, if their resources are having to be stretched further, that obviously will have an impact also on how what the relationship looks like with their brands and what their expectations are, right? So if you don't, for example, as a new brand or an emerging brand, have enough cash flow to sort of like bootstrap you through a period of time where brands are not willing to offer you, you know, I think what they previously might have been able to offer you in terms of keeping your business afloat, obviously that's going to have a negative impact and can lead some brands to close. So I think it's also about like the positionality of Black and BIPOC owned brands and thinking about what resources are made available to start with, right? So that when those founders or designers are in positions such as, you know, currently like the economic conditions that we're currently experiencing, there is a plan B, there is a plan C to get them through these periods of difficulty. I know that's been really important for me as a founder. And also just as someone who works across the industry, you know, just recently as last month, I was part of a session at Parsons with Macy's to work on, you know, workshop through their private brands. And to go back to the earlier question, you know, I think companies are really feeling that and want to build these authentic relationships with diverse and inclusive brands. But I think what's really important is about having honest and open conversations about where you are and what the expectations that you have are, so that those expectations can be met, right? And so that that responsibility isn't solely burdened by a brand like a Busayo, right? Or like a LULAH, but it's a shared responsibility. And it's part of I think, a more transparent and open relationship overall.
That's a great lead into my next question. This is for the panel. There have been several retailers joining the 15% pledge. How do you believe the industry should hold retailers accountable?
I mean, I can start and just say that I do believe, so first of all, just to back up for a second, the 15% pledge, founded by Aurora James of Brother Bellies, is making a huge impact across the industry, right? Like generating something like $10 billion in revenue for Black brands. So that in and of itself is a huge feat and an incredible accomplishment. But I also think that the way I perceive it is more of an invitation for brands who already hold certain values to be able to flex those values, so to speak, right? But not so that it's some form of accountability measure in which brands are being held hostage, right? Like, I personally, as a founder, don't want to work with a company who doesn't share the same values as me at LULAH, right? So I just think that, like, it has to resonate, it has to feel authentic. And that's really what I prioritize over, because I think otherwise it can feel very performative, right? Which is then not a sustainable relationship and not a sustainable accountability measure. So I think it's definitely a beautiful invitation for brands to essentially, I think, demonstrate existing values that they have, right? And to be able to tap into, for example, new opportunities and partnerships with brands that they might not have had the opportunity to work with previously. I think that's one of the tremendous opportunities that it presents. But in terms of it being a sort of like force of accountability within the industry, I perceive it as more of sort of an open invitation, right?
Nice.
I mean, the only thing I would add is just, we have partners that haven't signed the pledge who are wonderful partners, right? Like truly wonderful, supportive, gone above and beyond, really true partners, right? And they haven't signed the pledge. And so to me, I think the pledge is not just, it's just not an indication that, this partner is necessarily shares your values, as we would say, right? Like you may not have signed the pledge and be wonderful, and you may have signed the pledge and be really difficult to work with, I certainly think it's really opened up a lot of opportunity, but for me, it's not dispositive. Like, whether you've signed the pledge or not, it's what is the relationship you have with our brand? How are you approaching us? How are you supporting our work? So I certainly think it's great. I do think that for some of the designers on the call, if you're reaching out to a buyer at a place that has signed the pledge, there is nothing to say, put it in your email, like, we see you've signed the pledge. And, this, like, use some of these business obligations to kind of open the door to the conversation, in terms of if you're doing buyer outreach, for example. But certainly, for me, I don't look at it as like an end all and be all, right? Because we do have partners that haven't signed that are really phenomenal to work with, so I will say that.
I think one of the most powerful things about the 15% pledge is the education that it has, that they've been able to share, and the awareness around the disparity and the inequity in the fashion industry. I think even for retailers that I know who haven't signed, many of them are considering it. Many of them are preparing behind the scenes to get to a place where they can sign and hold themselves accountable. So I think the educational component, and even for me, learning just where the gaps are, has been really helpful. But I agree with Busayo. I think there are great, notable, responsible retailers out there that want to support brands of color in a unique way. And I think it's all about us sharing as much information as possible and tools. So yeah, for all the brands that are on here, I'm all about supporting. I forgot to mention this in a previous question, but we do have our IMFC program where we invite Black-owned brands to participate on our shows at a complimentary rate, where we give them a booth and an opportunity to showcase their collections to notable retailers. And so we have a few spots for each of our events. So I could definitely share more with the group here on how they can apply for anyone that is a brand that's interested in wholesale.
And I just want to add really quickly, Felita, just because I definitely appreciate the sentiments shared. And I think that another thing for me that's really important, or just like a further insight, is like the discovery process in terms of like the consumer perspective is really important, right? And I think it's also really important from a wholesale perspective. And so like there has also been this like pattern of then like grouping all the Black-owned brands together, right? And I think that like that then skews like a very natural and authentic discovery process for the consumer, and also can sort of even like invite someone who just completely wants to ignore that to do so, right? And so it also can like facilitate in certain ways discrimination. So I think retailers also need to shoulder the responsibility of being creative and innovative about how they're actually showcasing brands once they have signed the pledge, and not just to, it's like really good examples of like this grouping together are in like big box retailers, and like, I'm sure we can all think of examples, but there's like, it's sectioned off, in their stores, which I think is actually like, it can feel counterintuitive at first, but like it actually can feel like a disservice, right, to brands. So,
I have a question though about that, because as a consumer walking into a retail environment, looking for a Black designer, sometimes you have sales teams that are just not aware unless it is in a specific area. So maybe that presents also an opportunity for education, right, around the brands, minority brands that are being sold.
I honestly like going somewhere and knowing where all the Black stuff is, because that's what I came to go buy anyway. So like Target having all of the Black hair products in that spot, to me, actually, I like it. It benefits me. And even when I do go on like these websites now that do have a large amount of Black designers, most of them have collections now that say by Black designers. And that's where I go to shop, because at the end of the day, that's who I want to support. And I think Black people in general, I think we've always been, I think we're getting better, but I think we've always by default had to support our own businesses because we did not have access to be able to even walk into some department stores 50, 60 years ago. And so now we are able to walk into those department stores and actually support our own businesses. So I've never shied away from like, yeah, put me in with all the Black people. Like, if I'm at a tech conference and there's like, and they go and introduce me to somebody, most of the time they'll be like, oh, like this is somebody I think you would be like interested in meeting, and they're Black, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like, so I mean, that's
yeah,
that's
I think what Ibada is saying is super relevant for the designer. We hear this all the time. We do not want to be grouped with all the Black designers. We are, advanced contemporary or luxury or so I think designers of color see themselves more broadly than the consumer is ready to shop. So there is a disconnect. Maybe that's another webinar, but there is some friction between the customer experience and what you're saying, Amira, is like, yeah, but I want to know, and versus the designer's perception of being with their competitors, with their peers that may not be Black.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to the next question so we have time for our audience. So my last question is for the panel. Amira, we'll start with you. In order for minority-owned businesses to have access to wholesale opportunities, what changes should be made to the retail system?
Well, I think the retail system, if they are truly committed to supporting and diverse brands, they need to be able to like dramatically change the system. Like you can't measure these brands with the same ruler that you measure brands who communities have had hundreds of years head start. they have more economic opportunities, and in many ways they have more educational opportunities. And so you are, by way of you requesting that they work to fit within a system that wasn't designed to let them in, it's not going to provide any real results. If you're requesting that, you know, all of these brands work with you on net 60 terms, and this is a designer that is self-funded, does not have access to capital, and then you pay on net 90 terms when it should have been 60 terms, and then, you know, you wonder why the designer can't work with you anymore. That's the reason, you know. So you can't expect them to be able to do the same things. And that doesn't mean that you're going to get a lesser quality product. That doesn't mean that you're not going to make just as much revenue. It means that you have to find different ways within your company to address the needs of a demographic that you have yet to really get to know and to learn how to work with. And I think that what's also really important is that there has to be tools like the Folklore Connect to be able to provide them with just the discovery option. So right now we've had people sign the pledge, but there haven't been many resources to help retailers fulfill that pledge, you know, and so, and even to help brands be able to manage that new demand. So I think there needs to be more tech platforms that, you know, are doing things from a sourcing side, that's doing things from, you know, consulting, because, you know, now that people have signed it, what's next? And, you know, you can come to the Folklore Connect if you're really interested, and really making an impact. So thefolklore.com. But yes.
Anyone, Charles?
Yes, that question one more time.
What needs to change in retail for BYOC?
Yeah, what I really loved about Ibada's thoughts in the previous question is how nuance is important and authenticity is super important. And so with retail and its relationship with designers like myself, if your team reflects those ideas, if your marketing reflects those ideas, if you're actually in a really extensive way presenting designers of color and designers from marginalized identities, their product on par with everyone else's, I think that is exactly what we want. And it's also what a customer deserves, because then a customer is allowed to respond to product and not to respond to biases. And that's what I want. I have this particular point of view that's mine because it's the life that I've lived, but it's for every woman, it's for every man, it's for every person to opt into in a way that makes them happy. And retail can actually allow that if they authentically have a relationship with product. And yeah, I think that's what needs to continue to change.
Excellent.
I think just a deepening continuation of, because I think from a customer standpoint, what we were experiencing pre-2020, where like there were just blocks to particular segments of the population, from a business standpoint, really made no sense if you really think about it. Like there's so much desire and demand for diversity in how you show up in the world. Like people want to wear clothes that are colorful and bright and with patterns and all over the place. And I remember for so long time when we would try to sell, it was always like, oh, prints don't do well for us, or we have problems, you know, it was like, I could always write the responses, you know, and all of these things are not true, right? Like they may be true in some instances, but they're not absolutes. So I think the continuing questioning, which I think 2020 really brought forth, of like all of these assumptions that had been made, all of these truths, right? I think as an industry, there was a challenge to it. But I'm wondering how long it's going to last. And also, are we going to return to kind of like this, you know, rigidity around like, you know, seasonal demand? Like this is what the customer wants now. And if you don't meet that, then sorry, bye-bye. And then, you know, that kind of trend-driven, flim-flammy tendencies of the industry. I just wonder if we're gonna get better at re-examining those, right? But I think the landscape has changed dramatically, and I just hope that it continues to change and people continue to interrogate their assumptions and their biases, because I think we're doing a disservice to the customer. I think a lot of those beliefs were not serving the customer well, and I think they now see that. So I just hope that it continues. And then I think brands need to get much more intentional also and aggressive about selling and getting themselves out there.
I agree. I think listening, from a retail standpoint, I think it's about really wanting to learn about who the brand is, why they belong in their stores or on their online stores, what the brand DNA is, what the story is, so that they can filter that down to their customers. I do see a lot of boxes being checked off. Okay, we need to have a Black-owned brand in our store, so let's go and find one. I think the approach should be more authentic in order for brands to be successful, for it to be sustainable, as Ibada mentioned. So leaning in, listening to the brand, having the desire to want to form a relationship and to want to develop them and to have sustainability, to see brands of color grow, I think is what we all need to do to support these incredible designers that deserve a platform, but it's about really wanting to do it and putting in the work. And also for retailers to educate the brands. If you see a brand that is handling business in a way that may be different or maybe disservicing them, it's also about having a dialogue and saying, hey, I know you're new, or I know this may be something that you're not familiar with, but I'm going to pair you with a brand that has had the same challenge, or I'm going to connect you with this retailer that may be better for you. So I think it's also about sharing information and supporting the community.
Great. Ibada, you want to take us out?
Sorry about that. Yes, I lost my connection briefly, Felita. So can you just share with me what the question was again?
Yeah, we were just, closing the conversation with what retailers need to do to make the space of wholesale and retail more equitable.
That's a great question. I think ultimately for me, it comes down to not compartmentalizing like diversity, equity, and inclusion, right, as like an addendum. Like for me, just like sustainability, it's a pathway to profitability, right? It like helps to set you on a path of success for a viable business, as long as you have all of the other components, right, of like a desirable product or service, which, like, I think the assumption is like, if you're in the space and you're having those conversations, you definitely do. And it's, feasible in terms of, managing the business. I think that like there's this misperception, which often leads to a lot of performance in the industry, that like, okay, we've got to like figure out a way to add in some kind of equity or diversity component, as opposed to just like thinking about real human experiences that already speak to your brand identity, whether that's as a retailer or as a designer, right? And then sort of thinking about symbiosis between brands and retailers from that point. So yeah, for me, it's really about the interconnectivity of that and the integration of equity and inclusion into the core of the business model.
Thank you. Thank you all. I love this panel. Sasha, I'm going to turn it over to you so that we can address questions from our audience.
Great. Hi. We have some great questions, and I'm going to consolidate a few that have a similar theme. And one is feeling wholesale ready, which Edwina did talk about earlier in the hour. So Edwina, the question is, when should your brand start to reach out to buyers? Is there a certain amount of followers, years in business, press, or recognition you should aim for before wholesaling your product? And how is the best way for you to reach out to retailers? Cold emailing, calling, selling lookbooks? What would you suggest?
That's a great question. A loaded one. I'll try to cover the points that I think are, the ones that come up the most for me. It's about having product. I think Charles can attest to this. It's about having product that you're proud of, that you're ready to show, product that you're prepared to produce, because a lot, especially in the US market, I visit trade shows all over the world, and the US retailers and the ones that attend trade shows, for example, are order writing retailers. So some of them expect to leave with paper and with your line sheets when they meet you. So I think being prepared for a retailer that's like, you know what, I am going to try, I'm going to order 10 of these shirts in a large, 15 in an extra small, whatever it is that they think they need for their stores. I think brands that want to go into wholesale have to have the production down. You have to have a presence online, in my opinion. A lot of retailers will look on your website before they make a decision. Many of them are using Instagram as a website. So I'm not saying there's a specific amount of followers you must have, but I do think having a presence on social helps, because that has become the new website. Again, the DNA, your ethos, who you are as a brand, why you think you belong in a store, or why you think your product is necessary for a customer, showing the retailer that you understand who their customer is key. To be able to approach them and for them to know that you're knowledgeable about their space really helps. In terms of outreach, I love brands that just do the guerrilla style situation. They go on Instagram, they'll DM the buyer, they will hit them up on LinkedIn, for example. A lot of people that are targeting department stores, for example, are like, how can I get this buyer's information? Call Macy's office. Hi, I have an incredible accessories brand. I'm based in Brooklyn. This is my target customer. I think it would be perfect in your Herald Square store. Can you please connect me with your accessories buyer, or at least provide their name or their contact information? Sometimes you leave with all of it. Sometimes you leave with a name. Take that name, go on LinkedIn, try to connect. And so it does take a lot of hard work to build that target list. Tap into brands that you know are in market. Many brands share their buyer lists with each other. And so I think tapping into brands that are in stores that you would like to get into is a great list. And also go on your competitors' websites. There's a stockist list that most brands put on their websites. So that's a little cheat sheet to help you target some retailers that you may think are like-minded. So there are many different ways, but those are a few.
Thanks, Edwina. Anyone else?
The only thing I would add is learn the business, right? I think a lot of times there's a whole language in this industry. There's a whole cadence, there's a talent time, there's a calendar, there's all of those things. And I definitely think that when I started, I certainly had to put myself through school to learn it. And I think that's something that people don't necessarily take that time to do, right? Like you can start a fashion brand and have a fashion show, but not everybody does that, but there's a lot of people that do. The best way to get your clothes into a store, right? So really work on learning, attending webinars. You guys have already started, like being on webinars like this. You guys have an insane amount of resources that you've shared with people that have been attending. So really making sure that you learn the business, learn the timing, learn the pace of it, so that you're showing up, having your line sheets done at the right time, having collections ready. Those are all things that are really important, And so I would just suggest to young brands that like you make sure that you learn the business that you're entering, and do that work.
I would also say know your numbers too, because you could jump too quickly into working with a big department store, and that could tank your business because there's a lot of money that needs to be invested, GS1 codes, etc. And then you also might have not been charging enough from the wholesale price for you to actually be able to even cover the cost of it, let alone make a profit. So I always advise people before your first retail store, instead of just jumping into a department store because it gives you that cachet, try with some of like your local boutiques, try out mixing up pricing, do those smaller boutiques for the first year, 2 years before you jump into those larger department stores, because they take a lot of money, they take a lot of time. And although they are great from a marketing perspective as well as from just a general revenue perspective, you could not end up with the business after you do one order. So
great point. Thank you, Amira. So our next question, anyone feel free to answer. How often would you recommend putting together a wholesale competitive analysis? Is this a standard that wholesalers look for? Is this something done every 3 to 6 months?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know about the cadence. I mean, I have sort of like a competitive landscape that I'm always paying attention to. And that's from like a direct competitor kind of, and then kind of like a second tier, and then also industry wide, right? Like what I do is really specific, but you know, I think about a brand like LULAH Johnson, for example, as like the women who buy LULAH probably will look at Busayo. So that's someone that I think of as like a second tier competitor, right? Like they're not as direct, but they're still there. I definitely think the stockist, like a major gem was just dropped by Edwina when she spoke earlier. So like that's something that, you know, we look at, obviously, like who's carrying our competitors. But I don't really look at it as a like 6 months I do a new one. I more update what we already have, right? Like I'm constantly looking at it and adding brands and taking some brands away. And then obviously, like in terms of the outreach of like who we're selling to, you also want to see, you want to update that, right? Like if your competitors are being carried at the same place, what's your pricing like? What's their pricing like? That kind of thing. Looking more at the direct competitors, right? So I just updated, probably I would say like, probably after each market, I kind of look at like what's happened. But it's not something I go back to every, 3 months or something like that.
Great. Edwina, did you have anything else? I saw you on mute, but I wasn't sure if you wanted.
I was being mindful of time, but yeah, I think that as Busayo mentioned, I don't think it's something that you have to do every 3 months, every couple of months. I think it's probably when you're launching something new. If you have a new collection or after every season, you may want to just take a look at what your competitors are doing, how, what the sellout price is on retail websites so that you're being competitive. And so that you're standing out in whichever way you would like. So I would say, every 6 months, even annually, it's always good to just have a temperature check and to see what other competitors in your space are up to.
Perfect. Let's take one more question. This is open for everyone to contribute their thoughts on. Does anyone have any tips, suggestions, tricks, resources on how to create an attractive and attainable win-win marketing strategy with retailers to help solidify those partnerships?
Know them well, right? So I would say a lot of what Edwina had said, the emails, the cold calling, that was in the question. But know who you're writing to, right? Like I remember I still do like just outreach to stores. And so it's really important to communicate something about them in what you're saying to them, right? So making sure that the email is about them, it's not really about you. That would be my biggest trick. So I try to know the store before I write and know something about them and make the email personal to them, so that they're being seen in what you're offering to them. And then it's hard work. Like you have to do the cold calling and the emailing and all of that stuff. Like there's no way to get away from that. I don't think.
I think another great strategy is allowing your customers to speak for you. So, customer reviews are always the best. And a lot of retailers make decisions on brands based on their customer feedback, their traction with customers online, how involved their customers are with them on social media, for example. So I would lead with, whatever your customers are saying about you, great reviews, sharing information about who your customer is. Like if you have an avatar or profile for your key customer, share that with the retailer, because once they understand that you know who you're targeting and they know why you're coming to them, I think that opens doors really quickly.
I think my advice would be, day one, have a really beautiful product. Make sure you have done the work preemptively to create something that is just exceptional, and then take exceptional images of that product. And that really does give retailers a lot of confidence. And because at the end of the day, they're selling a product and they're also going to be utilizing your imagery across their platforms. And because we live in such a global stage, you know, even with Harbison, I found it seems like growth is faster, you know, outside of the States by way of our images on social. And then when the customer or the retailer gets the product in their hands and it is just as beautiful as it is in the image, it's really a win-win. And all the other stuff, you can figure it out as you go, because there's going to be so many questions and so many missteps from a business point of view. But at the end of the day, we are selling a thing, and it has to be almost inarguably good in order to even compete at all, anywhere.
And my last little tidbit would be professional. You know, make sure that you are responding to messages on time. Make sure that once you receive an order that you are fulfilling that order on time, because, you know, people are going to love you if you're easy to work with and your product sells. But if you're not easy to work with, there have been some brands we worked with from the direct to consumer side where I was like, it ain't even worth it, because I don't even want to have to talk to them. We sell them so well and it's not even worth it because it's just so difficult. We got the order 3 months late. Like, so we really do care about that. And other retailers talk, and, you know, they switch companies. And so they'll remember things like that. So I know that a lot of small brands, it's just them. And so if you're really going to prioritize wholesale, you really have to show up and put in the time, the effort, and be professional when you are working with these representatives. If you don't have that time to dedicate it, then just hold off on wholesale and focus on one thing, because stretching yourself too thin and trying to do too many things, you're not going to do any of them successfully.
Brilliant. Such incredible feedback. I'm so glad everyone got to contribute to that last question. And I just want to conclude by sharing with everyone who's joining us today that we promise to send these resources and links to what Edwina had mentioned earlier, and any additional resources that our panelists have that we can share. We'll also send you some recaps from previous webinars we've held. And I can't thank you all enough. Edwina, Amira, Charles, Busayo, Ibada, who had to jump off at 2, and Felita, our incredible leader throughout this whole series. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and stories with us today. And please stay tuned, everyone who's joining us, for what's next. We promise to continue this conversation with you all. And hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.